This here is the Apple M3 MAX MacBook Pro, and this is by far the best laptop I have ever used by a long shot, and the competition really doesn't exist for this. But regardless, I am returning it. And perhaps you're in the same situation where you think this $4,000 laptop is not for you. It might not be. Let me explain. Firstly, if this is the first video that you've seen on my channel about this laptop, then I highly recommend checking out all the other videos about it, because that will explain and go more in detail about how does this compare with Intel desktop or AMD desktop version of CPUs. What type of GPU is in there and how does that compare with desktop ones? Is there any future for Apple GPUs? As well as the live video editing test in Premiere Pro, which we did on this one as well. And in my experience, honestly, I'm not joking, this is by far the best laptop I have ever tried, used. It's absolutely insane. And one of the best things about this for me is the battery life, that you can do it all on battery. There's some amazing Windows laptops out there, but the biggest downside is the battery life. You're not going to be getting the same performance on battery when plugged in. So this is the absolute ultimate on-the-go laptop for creators who need to have the best performance, you know, unplugged. There is no competition in that, like, unbelievable. Absolutely more than double what the competition would give for the same performance, basically. And this laptop is so good that it's very hard to find any faults in here, what you're doing. It's just beautiful design, usability, battery life, trackpad. I mean, everything's absolutely awesome. By the way, if you are missing the snapping windows on what you get on Windows, you know, snapping windows on Windows, because that feature is actually patented by Microsoft and Windows, you can't have it on the Mac. But I found a third-party application that actually does exactly the same thing. Go check out rectangle.app. Just Google that and you'll find it in there. I'm gonna leave a link in the description below if you want. And then you can get finally snapping windows. By holding two buttons and the arrows, you can snap them on each side of this, which would absolutely change my experience on macOS. This is like one of the biggest things that like hold me down when using macOS usually, where just when I'm using something and I want to get between two windows, it's now finally working on Mac as well. I do want to say though, it's not as good as on Windows, because whenever you hover the mouse over the other window, you have to activate it rather than constantly going there. So for example, if I'm watching a YouTube video while making notes, for example, and I want to pause the video, I have to hover over the window, click on it, and then pause it. Then it will pause this and then go back on there and activate the window and then go back and start typing in there. So it's like one click too many, which maybe there's a workaround, let me know in there. Back to the performance of this. This is absolutely insane. So if you're a video editor or photo editor, or perhaps even someone with programming, coding, like compiling code with this or the CPU performance on the go, it's absolutely insane. If macOS is not an issue for you, honestly, I can recommend it to everybody. And the video and photo editing is absolutely insane. I highly recommend you go check out my versus Intel and AMD videos so you can actually see how ridiculous this is, and then you'll see, oh my word, it is literally Apple magic somehow this is working. But you're saying that you're still gonna return it. And yes, I'm still gonna return it because I didn't want to pay the extra $1,000. And you might be saying, what on earth are you talking about? So here's the reason why I am returning this. Basically, when I was testing this and editing this, I've had it now for almost 2 weeks, and I've been using this every day, pretty much like 8 hours in a row. Everything that I've done here just went in there and, you know, done everything here as much as I can. One of the things that I saw online is, and actually Apple said it themselves, they say that 8 gigabytes of Apple unified memory is the same as 16 gigabytes of Windows or, you know, PC memory. I'm not sure if you've seen that on RAM. And you'd be thinking 48 gigabytes of unified memory, which I have this. This is kind of the base configuration. So the CPU and GPU are the max on the M3 Max, so you can't upgrade anymore, but the SSD is 1 terabyte and I have 48 gigabytes of RAM in this one. And you might have thought, and I thought as well, that 48 gigabytes of RAM, surely that's plenty, especially if 8 gigabytes is 16, you know, type of comparison, then this 48 is going to be kind of like 96 on Windows. That should be plenty for most of the people. And I thought that as well. So I am using iStatistica Pro app to actually monitor some of the hardware and what I'm doing, and I wanted to see what the hardware is doing while I'm editing and while I'm doing some of the work in there. And at first I was set this of how much RAM is being used, and that showed always like, you know, sometimes, you know, 15, 20 something gigabytes, and you think half of it is actually, you know, not utilized. But that wasn't the full story. I changed the hardware to actually showcase me how much RAM is free when I'm editing. And when we did the live playback test as well, you can see this on, you know, the live stream. You can see me like actually discover this live. But I went a lot more in depth after the live stream when I was editing and seeing that actually when I'm editing a simple podcast, when we did with, you know, Matt Back from Future Systems, there's two cameras, both of them 1080p. And I'm just editing it in a 4K timeline. You can see that this machine is using up all the RAM that there is, all 48 gigabytes. There's like 100 and something megabytes free. Sometimes it was less than 100 megabytes, sometimes 300 megabytes. When you get that close, you realize it's all maxed out, which now makes me realize, oh my word, my workflow, which might be yours as well in Premiere Pro, I can't say this to every single applications out there, but for your workflow, you might be bottlenecked by the RAM capacity. And that was a simple project. If I was doing a little bit more complex things, I might have used even more RAM. It might be the way Mac OS and this M3 Max utilizes the RAM, because it's a unified memory, so it's split between the CPU and the GPU. Everything can be used, you know, the RAM, it uses the same amount. It just maybe utilizes as much as you have RAM, it just caches it as much as possible. All the stuff that can be cached in RAM, it just uses it. If you've got 48 gigabytes, it uses all of it. If you've got 64, it uses all of it, and so on with higher as well. That still showcases me that actually there's still performance on the table on the M3 Max, and I'm not utilizing all of it when I'm using it. And then I think, okay, let's upgrade the RAM. So you can see on the Apple homepage, if you upgrade to 64 gigabytes, that's going to be extra $200. But bear in mind, you're upgrading from 48 gigabytes to 64 gigabytes. So the extra 16 gigabytes there cost you $200. Very expensive indeed. But if you want 128 gigabytes, that's going to cost you extra $1,000. Which means that Apple is charging you $12.5 per gigabyte. And you might be thinking, well, that doesn't sound very much, does it? $12.5 per gigabyte. Let's put this into perspective. Those chips that are extra on, you know, for the RAM are just memory chips, right? And when we look at PC, you know, equivalent, I'm looking at the most expensive 64 gigabytes of RAM that I can find. I can see G.Skill, Trident Z here, Z5, RGB RAM, 64 gigabytes, 2 sticks at 6,800 mega transfers per second, costs around $360. And to be honest, you can find the same kit, same specs, cheaper somewhere else. But let's say the worst case scenario, this is $360 for 64 gigabytes. That is gonna cost you $5.6 per gigabyte. That is less than half the price what Apple charges. And bear in mind, when you buy these RAM sticks, you're also gonna be paying for the PCB. You're also going to be paying for the controller that's on there, the packaging, as well as the heat sinks and the RGB and rest of the things in there as well. Which means that actually, when we take all of that pricing off, the price per gigabyte of RAM in there, if we could only get the memory chips of that RAM stick, it will be a lot cheaper. And that's what I mean. That I think Apple's biggest ROI, now I could be wrong and this is just me speculating, is all on the upgrades and on the storage, whether it's SSD or RAM storage, because the prices for Apple upgrades is absolutely horrendous. You might be saying, yeah, you can upgrade the external storage, and that is absolutely right, and I would highly recommend you to do so as well. If you're looking for the best storage for your Mac device, whether it's laptops, Mac Studio, Mac Mini, then I highly recommend you go check out my storage guide for the Mac devices. I'll leave it linked in the description below, but there I'll explain how you can get something like this and an SSD like this Samsung 990 Pro, for example, or some of the more affordable ones. So if you're looking to save money, have faster, more flexible, and more warranty on your storage, then check it out in the video description below. The video is right down there. If you can and you want to save money, buy the external storage when you want to upgrade the storage. Upgrade your RAM first, because you can't upgrade that later, and that's all going to be, you know, baked into the chip. But regardless, I think it's a little bit more expensive. And you might be saying, well, why didn't you pay for this? Just don't pay for this if you think it's expensive. But that's the point. I'm seeing that in my workflow, what I am doing, I didn't want to pay the extra $1,000 to get 128 gigabytes, because that's what I'm using with my PCs here on Windows. And I don't think the 8 and 16 gigabyte, you know, kind of a sentence here by Apple, it's not right, because I can see 48 gigabytes is all utilized there. Bear in mind, when you have 128 gigabytes, actually a lot of it can be GPU and a lot of it CPU as well. So you don't actually have, you know, 128 gigabytes of RAM for the CPU or GPU. It's combined. So it's kind of 64 for each, or, you know, 48 for each, and then something like that. So I felt like, oh, even though this is so awesome and it could do that, I'm actually still bottlenecked by this RAM, and I'm not getting all of the experience what I'm getting from here, which means I've got performance on the table, and you could see this could be even closer to the PC. And I'm thinking, well, why would you buy a laptop that's got performance on the table, or you don't get all of the performance because you need to upgrade more? You're not going to get any more CPU cores or GPU cores. You just bottleneck by the RAM capacity in there, and you can't upgrade that later. And now knowing this, and I thought, well, I'll have to return it, because I don't want to pay extra $1,000 to return it and get the $5,000 one now, because then I would have that. And I think this is where this video becomes helpful for you. And if you're using the similar workflows, or if you're thinking maybe 48 gigabytes is enough, it might be enough for you, and it might do the job very, very well. But you could actually get a lot more CPU and GPU performance out by just upgrading the RAM. And this all depends on your workflow, and just tests that are just exporting one codec to the other are not actually equivalent for this. You have to work with the PC and actually see how much RAM you're using, because when you're actively working with the program, it caches all sorts of temporary files on the RAM that you're constantly using again and again. And when you know, playing back 2 times the speed or going backwards, a lot of things are used by RAM, GPU and CPU. Think about how much RAM you might use, and you might actually need more of that. Now, if you're thinking that $4,000 will be enough for you, and I'm gonna get the best, you know, laptop possible, I'd highly recommend you considering spending the extra $200 or $1,000 to get the maximum amount of RAM here, just so that, you know, you'll get all the, you know, PC performance you get there. Especially when your projects get a bit bigger, you get a little bit more demanding things, suddenly you have the RAM to actually keep up with it. So that's why I am returning my Mac, even though it's absolutely awesome and I love the space black, or whatever Apple calls it. It's not as black as it is on person. It is very, very silvery, dark silver. I would call this space gray, and the other things something else gray. But it's a fantastic laptop. But unfortunately, I'm returning this because I feel like spending $4,000 to actually be handicapped by the performance in my workflow is just not worth investment in this, and that's why this is going back. If you've got any experience with the M3 Max, I'd love to hear from you in the description below. Let me know what you think. Or if you want to pick up this one, but with the good RAM configurations, I'll leave this in the description as well. And if you're thinking, do you know what, I don't care about Mac, I want to build myself a PC, then there's free guides in the description below where you can build yourself a PC, whatever budget you have. Go check them out. And that's it. Let's pack it up.